Nice to see you all. I know we've got some new Patreon subscribers in the house already, so I have to say hello. We're going to talk about what just happened in the floor of the House. We're going to talk about Trump being threatened with jail by Judge Engoron, so stay tuned for that. But I'm going to give everybody a minute to log in here and just say hello, welcome. And if you're new here, I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, also known as ECM. You know, I did this whole intro yesterday, you guys, and I realized that by the time I got to the end of it, I had forgotten to mention that I used to be an adjunct law professor at Columbia Law School. Somebody had asked, like, who am I to be talking about this in a very friendly way? It wasn't kind of like trolling, but it's funny. It's hard to get the mouthfuls of the qualifications out sometimes on the fly. So in any event, really nice to see you all here. I am coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva land. Today, I am wearing a kind of rough-edged white shirt underneath a black blazer. My hair is down and super straight today. I straightened it before I came on the air with you guys. I have dirty blonde hair, pink skin, green eyes. I've got on kind of like a brown lipstick today. I'm sitting in my office, as always, for our visually challenged viewers. We're so glad you're joining us. And as always, my pronouns are she, her. All right. We got so many people in today. I already saw Sweden on here, Canton, Massachusetts. We got a bunch of people from nearby Denton, Texas, Colorado, Southern Florida, Annapolis, Maryland. Nice to see you all. San Jose, California, Providence, Rhode Island. Good to see you all. Okay, so Jim Jordan has just lost the vote for Speaker. It's so hard for me to get through this stuff, you guys, without laughing. He's just lost the vote for the Speaker of the House for the third time, this time by 25 votes. That's at least where the count was when I went on the air. And so, hey, West Virginia. One of the things that people should be aware of is that he's lost additional votes. So he had 20 down votes in the first round, 22 down votes in the second round, 25 down votes at least in round 3. And yet here we are. At this time yesterday, it looked like he wasn't going to run it anymore. And now we're back again. And there has apparently been screaming and fighting and almost coming to blows inside the closed door meetings of the GOP caucus. And I don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, I have some ideas. I have some like random speculation about all of this. But I have to say that I think that this is really humiliating. And I know I'm not the first person to say that. I don't just mean for Jim Jordan, which, I take a little bit of Schadenfreude glee at Jim Jordan going down particularly after everything that he has done over the course of his life to harm other people. But I will just say that it's actually really humiliating for the GOP, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. One of the things that folks should be aware of, if you haven't been paying attention to this, is that Fox News has been just slaying the GOP on many of their shows over the last couple of days for this state of affairs. And that's on top of the fact that one of their primary anchors gave Biden's speech last night really high marks right after it ended. So it's very, very clear at this point that this is having some damage, not just to the country and not just on the international level, but also to the GOP itself. And, there are GOP representatives who are continuing to point this out, right? That, it looks like they don't deserve to govern, that those words have left the mouths of at least 5 GOP representatives in the last few days. So it's quite important at this point that, we understand that the damage that they're doing to themselves continues. And, I have to actually disagree with someone in the comments here who's saying that they don't care or that Jordan doesn't care. I actually think that's quite the opposite. I mean, one of the things that I think people need to realize here is that while Jim Jordan continues to put himself up, he's doing that because of the fact that he cares about the loss of white male power inside our government. So, in fact, I think the argument is that, he cares very deeply about what's happening. He doesn't care about it in the way that we do, but he cares enough. And, I think the other thing that folks should be aware of is that while, this state of affairs is really not ideal, one of the things that it's doing that I think is actually very, very positive is it is pushing Republicans who have had enough to step back a bit from the far right wing of the party. And I'm just going to point out that we now have a multitude of stories of people who voted against Jim Jordan in round 1 and round 2 being threatened by phone, being threatened by email, being, they've had Ken Buck has had one of his landlords refuse to continue leasing him property for one of his staff offices. We have, members of Don Bacon's wife is apparently sleeping with a loaded gun because she's gotten direct threats. Not that that's a solution to anything, but, that's a sign of how bad it's gotten. And, quite a few of these members now are speaking out about the fact that the threats are actually making them dig their heels in more. And that in and of itself is also something that, that moves in the direction of a real breakdown inside the GOP. And I got to point out to people, like, this is necessary, right? Like, one of the things that we actually want is the collapse of the support for the far right wing of the GOP. Like, there's no way that we come out the other side of this well if the GOP sticks together with the ultra-fascist wing of the party. So, I think it's really important to not be sarcastic about this and to not be bitter, right? I think it's really important to look at this through the lens of, like, the fact that this is actually progress. And I hate to put it in those terms because I know that the government's fundamentally, like, shut down right now, but this is what needs to happen, right? Like, think about how much worse it would be if they actually had elected Jim Jordan speaker because everybody stuck together, right? I also want to point out that, there are people asking why it was only 210. There are apparently 2 absences on the Democratic side right now. This is not a sign that anybody flipped and went to Jordan. So please don't get worried about that. All right. I also just want folks to kind of be aware that even though Rachel Maddow has floated this idea that this is really what, like, Bannon and his ilk want, the fact that there are now members of the Republican House and a growing number of members of the Republican House that are rejecting the idea of an insurrectionist being their leader, that are rejecting the idea that Jim Jordan should be given more power when he gave a press conference this morning where he again wouldn't state that Joe Biden had won the election in 2020. It's actually really good news in a very, like, backhanded sort of way. It's very good news. And it's also creating room for people who have been too terrified, because I have to remind everybody, one of the things that was reported on January 6th itself, after the riot was over and everyone came back to the House, and there were still, I think it's like 53 or 54 people who voted to deny the results of the election. After that moment, there was an enormous amount of reporting that came out that Republicans who voted not to confirm the results of the election, at least in some part, were terrified for their families. Were terrified that their wives and their children or their partners were going to be targeted, that they themselves were going to be murdered, because that is what the far right wing does. All right. The fact that we now have people standing up to these threats inside the GOP is really a significant development for the future of democracy. All right. And I think everybody's got to kind of, like, pay very close attention to that and do your very best to not slide into cynicism. All right. I also want to just point out that there is a lot of discussion this morning about Jim Jordan's reaction in the coming days when he is basically forced out. There's a lot of discussion this morning, even from, people who are former Republican representatives, that he may try to burn the whole place down with him when he goes. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I will tell you that he is known for being very vengeful. This is a very significant public humiliation for him. And I don't know what that's going to mean in terms of how this is going to shake out going forward, given the very slim majority that the Republicans have in the House, right? I have to keep pointing out that, there are other ways out of this. I know that this idea of Hakeem Jeffries becoming speaker has lost some steam in the last 24 hours. I don't know, man. I still think the question is how hot the pressure cooker gets inside the House GOP. Because, by the way, the other thing that's really interesting about the votes that flipped from yes to no on Jordan this morning is they're all from purple districts. One of them is from Bucks County, where my parents live. And my parents are rabid Democrats. You all know this, like lifelong hardcore progressives. But one of the things that I want folks to really understand here is that the pressure of going home to those districts and having to explain this state of affairs has really only begun to cook some of these reps. And what they will be pushed to do in the coming days, given how this situation continues, is kind of up for grabs. All right. So I want people to do their best to kind of like stay positive about this and to really see it through the lens. Again, I got to remind people of like the fact that no positive change is going to come inside our comfort zone, right? Like this is uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable inside the House GOP right now. It's really uncomfortable for everybody who's watching it. And it's very uncomfortable for the country at large. And unless something breaks, right? Like we actually do have someone willing to come to the table and give some concessions to the Democrats, which hasn't happened yet, right? Unless we see some Republicans start to say, we've got to move in the direction of working for a bipartisan solution. This is where we're going to sit until that breaking happens. And, you know, we've got to be willing to allow the vise to continue to tighten, like full stop. So, yeah, I mean, Julie, by the way, Julie's here. Julie is an elected official herself in New York. You know, one of the things that she's pointing out is that these folks in New York State who are from districts that Biden won are going to, you know, they're going to get screwed, and they know it in 2024. And so the question is, are they going to be willing to do something differently to reach a different outcome, right? And one that allows them maybe to retain their seats. So there's a lot going on here yet to develop. I agree with all of you that it's getting very hot in this pot for all of us who are sitting in it. And all that said, I think it's really key that we allow them to continue to dissolve, because it's not until it actually gets to a breaking point that we're going to get a result that's better for anybody, for us, for the country, for anyone. And right now, we've got, you know, again, the Democrats completely sticking together, everybody feeling very fiery. You know, we had an incredible nominating speech again this morning for Hakeem Jeffries. We just got to sit with it. You know, I mean, again, this is like where all the work I do with like coaching and leadership comes together with all the work I do politically. Like, you've got to be willing to be uncomfortable, period. Right. And by the way, what I see when I hear people saying, why can't we just get the Democrats to agree to a moderate Republican? Okay. So I'm just going to point out, like, the desire to exit the discomfort before you've actually agreed to any concessions that are going to get you what you want is a losing strategy. We've got to be willing to, yes, Rose is right. We have to be willing to let the GOP hit bottom, in the language of recovery. Like, that's really what has to happen right now. So everybody's got to kind of like buckle up. All right. Okay. Something very interesting is happening in the New York State civil fraud case this morning. For those of you who haven't seen this yet, Judge Engoron is really mad. Here's why, for those who don't know the background. And a lot of this is behind the paywall at the Daily Beast. So let me just explain what's happened. When Judge Engoron entered his partial gag order against Trump several weeks ago, it was in the context of this situation where Trump had tweeted out this horrible lie about Judge Engoron's chief law clerk, who is like a first or second year lawyer who had a photograph taken with Chuck Schumer at like a meet and greet. It even looked kind of like they just run into each other on the street. I don't even know. It was like a selfie. And Trump tweeted it out saying that it was Chuck Schumer's girlfriend and that this was an indication that the judge was corrupt, the clerk was corrupt, everybody was a rabid Democrat. And he went off and basically put a target on the back of this young lawyer who was really just like doing her civic duty as a law clerk to a judge in New York State, right? And so one of the things that I want people to be aware of is that even though, so let me just finish the story. So then what happened was they got back from lunch after Trump had tweeted this. Engoron called everybody into his chambers and apparently gave Trump's lawyers and Trump himself a huge tongue lashing about targeting clerks and courtroom staff and other folks involved in the civil fraud case, and then issued this partial gag order. And during that interim delay where we were all waiting, wondering like why it was taking so long to come back from lunch, Engoron put a partial gag order on Trump, and Trump took down that post on Truth Social. However, he did not take down that post off of his website for fundraising purposes. And apparently the judge learned this morning, and I didn't know this either, because why would I ever be on Trump's website? But, you know, apparently the judge learned this morning that it had been up there for 17 days and in defiance of the gag order. And Engoron Engoron's hair is proverbially on fire. So this morning in the courtroom, he advised Trump's attorneys that he was going to be considering severe sanctions and imprisonment of Trump for violating the gag order. And he said he was pissed, right? The way that this is reported. I mean, this is, and I have to say, like, as a New York lawyer and somebody who has appeared in New York State court and in New York federal court, like, this is one of those moments that if you are anything like a reasonable attorney, you never want to have happen in your entire legal career, right? Where the judge is so livid that that you know that like really dire things are coming. All right. So the way that what Engoron did next is he said, I will now give Trump's counsel an opportunity to explain themselves on this. All right. And so Trump's lawyers were like, oh, this was totally unintentional. And this is a large machine. And, you know, Trump didn't realize that it was still up on the website. And Engoron was like, it may be a large machine, but Donald Trump's running it. Donald Trump is running the machine. And so what Engoron has done now, notwithstanding these protestations and the apologies, which, by the way, his attorneys have not done so far in this courtroom. This is also just a sign of how serious this situation has become, because they've apologized for nothing. Like literally yesterday, there was reporting that they had been treating the judge's clerk and one of the women on Tish James's team in really dismissive and disrespectful ways, to the point that the attorney at a sidebar at the bench had said to this attorney, you're being very disrespectful. You need to apologize. And the attorney said no, right in front of the judge, right? So also not a great legal strategy. But that this attorney, Kais, has not apologized for anything that has ever gone down in the courtroom or outside of it until today. And that in and of itself is a sign of how serious it has gotten inside Judge Engoron's courtroom. So what's happened now is Judge Engoron has said that he's taking this under advisement. And what that means in non-legal terms is that he's going to consider this after the testimony is done today and maybe tomorrow, and make a ruling. All right. So we don't know how this is all going to turn out. All right. But I will just tell you that, you know, I have said this over and over and over again. The walls are closing in toward pretrial detention for Donald Trump, whether it's here, whether it's in Fulton County, whether it's in the DC District Court, where Judge Chutkan issued that incredible limiting gag order earlier this week. You know, we've seen Trump nonetheless go out and attack Tish James since then, which is not a direct violation of Chutkan's order, but it runs right up against the order in Engoron's courtroom. Again, we're in a situation here where he can't stop himself. He's not going to stop himself. And the threat of imprisonment may be the only thing that stops him. And even then, I don't think that's going to be the case. Like he literally is like, has violated the gag order now. And the question is, what happens next? So Engoron has taken it under advisement, and we're going to see what happens. But, you know, if I were Trump's attorneys, I would be telling him that it was time to stop talking about anything having to do with any of these cases whatsoever. And even then, it wouldn't work. So that is where we are, and we're going to have to see what happens next. I'm going to remind everybody it's Friday in Trump land. Crazy things happen on Friday all the time in relation to Donald Trump. We'll see. All right. The other big news that's happening today is that oh, and I forgot to finish a loop on Jim Jordan. Let me just go back and do that really quick. So I wanted to mention, you know, that this thing about Rachel Maddow's commentary about the idea that somehow this is what's desired, right? That there's a wing of the party that wants to just shut down the government. This is Steve Bannon's whole plan, right? I have to say that I don't think that's exactly what's happening inside the GOP right now. I think that there is a portion of the GOP that wants chaos because chaos leads to authoritarianism. But also, I think that actually the more likely thing that's happening here is that this is not some grand scheme or a big plan. All right. I think that really actually the more likely feature of this is that everything is broken inside the GOP because of their loyalty to Donald Trump and their loyalty to his lackeys. And we're seeing that loyalty break apart. But, you know, some people asked me about my thoughts about that. Those are my thoughts. And, you know, frankly, I think, again, that it's actually like a good development that some people are walking away from that means of governing. All right. Okay. So the other big news that's happening today is Ken Chesebro's trial is getting started. So today, this morning, 450 potential jurors showed up at the Fulton County Courthouse. They are filling out jury questionnaires. And jury questionnaires, again, for those who are not familiar with this process, the way that this works is that a version of a jury questionnaire is submitted by the prosecution, a version is submitted by the defendant, and then they hack it out in front of the judge, which happened earlier this week. There were debates about what should be included in the questionnaire. The judge ruled on that. And so now all of these 450 jurors are filling out a written questionnaire, okay? And that questionnaire most likely contains questions about, like, who they thought won the election in 2020. And whether or not they think that they can be fair and impartial and unbiased, because that's a very standard question on a jury questionnaire. There will also be questions on there about their employment, right? About their age, about their party affiliation. There will be questions on there about their media exposure. Because this is the reason why this pulled jury pool is so enormous, right? They've got another 450 on backup right now, because they want to make sure that they've reached people who are fundamentally unbiased and can rule in a way that is fair and impartial. So one of the things that we're going to see after this is that once the jury questionnaires are completed, trial is going to recess for the weekend. And then on Monday, the voir dire process is going to start. And that is, there will be certain people dismissed over the weekend, no question. Okay. There will be people who are like, I'm all in on Trump, and they'll be gone. All right. There will also be people who will make arguments that for whatever reason they can't be present. Maybe they're taking care of a parent who is going through some form of a medical crisis, and the only person that parent has to rely on is them. This is going to be a very intensive trial. What? He took a plea. Chesebro just took a plea. Oh my God. All right. So this was the next question I was going to answer. We've had impeccable timing here this week, by the way, you guys. I just have to point this out. Okay. This is wild. So do you guys remember back on Monday when I said that I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were pleas on the courthouse steps leading up to the trial? This is usually when people plead out. All right. So we had the plea from Sidney Powell this week. Ken Chesebro has now taken a deal. What we knew last night from the reporting on this is that he had been offered a felony plea and he had rejected it. So the thing I'm going to be really interested to see right now, let's just go check this out in real time while we're sitting here, is whether or not he's taken a felony plea at this point. Because if he's taken a felony plea, that's a step up from the deal that Sidney Powell got. And so this is fascinating. And again, I just have to say, this plea has got to be grounded in testifying truthfully against the other defendants. And so one of the things that I want people to just really be clear on. Yeah, 3 minutes ago, this is breaking news. Holy cow. So one of the things that this means is that he's going to have to testify against Trump and the other co-defendants who remain. And, the other thing that I'm just going to tell you right now is that this is all going to be live streamed on YouTube in a matter of minutes. And we're going to get to see him plead guilty to whatever it is that he's pleading guilty to. This is crazy. All right. So one of the things that people should also be aware of course, if past his prologue, is that the question here, in addition to the fact that he's going to have to plea, he's going to have to do what's called allocuting, which is stating that the evidence exists to find him guilty. He's going to actually have to say that under oath in the courtroom in front of Judge McAfee. The other thing that's going to take place here is that we're going to learn whether or not he's given a proffer. Those of you who are here, you can go back and watch the breaking news broadcast on Sidney Powell's plea deal. Know that she had to proffer about that means give a statement to the prosecution about what she was able to testify to. If there is a proffer already on the record, that means that Fani Willis's team has evidence of what he's going to testify to, and that will be considered in determining what his sentence is likely to be after the fact. But there's going to be a condition here that he's going to have to testify truthfully. There's probably going to be a proffer on the record already. If Sidney Powell's plea is prologue, he's going to have to apologize to the people of the state of Georgia. And there's going to be a recommendation coming up about his actual sentencing. So this is fascinating. Real-time developments, my friends. So this means there will be no trial next week. And this, by the way, also means that we can now be on a fast track to schedule additional trials in McAfee's courtroom. This is really good stuff. I'm really pleased about this. And also, I just want to mention that if anybody at this point is concerned about, the provisions for sentencing or anything like that, I want to remind you guys, Ken Chesebro and Sidney Powell were two of the most significant players in the efforts to overthrow the 2020 election. It kind of doesn't get any higher than this. They were both in the room at the time that conversations were going on that were directly related to Donald Trump, knowing that the election had been lost and seeking to overthrow democracy anyway. And so this is huge. Huge. I mean, at this point, I'm really surprised. So he's pleading guilty right now. Wow. This is like amazing. I'm kind of tempted to like, watch this live on MSNBC. Again, I want to point out that we've got substantial immediate breaking news here, and this is a really, really good thing. I also just want to remind everybody that Rudy Giuliani is still indicted in Fulton County. Trump is still indicted in Fulton County, and this is now 3 out of 19 defendants that have taken a plea, 2 of whom are extremely significant. All right, so that leaves us with 16 remaining co-defendants who at this point I think are going to be racing to cut their own deal. So as I called it, here we're seeing this live posted here. Thank you to our audience. Apology letter to citizens, 100 hours of community service. We're going to have to see what else it is here that we're getting. This is wild. Full proffer due to the state. So he's going to have to tell the prosecution what it is that he is saying. And, I want everyone to just be like very, very aware of all of this. It's 2 down, 3 down. This is wild. So very, very crazy. Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to block this person. All right. So in any event, we're in very good situation here right now. I'm feeling very pleased about this. I will also just tell you that I think that this is going to raise very, very significant considerations and concerns if you're inside Donald Trump's legal team right now and the legal teams of everybody else. So want to remind everybody as well, hit the like button on this broadcast if you haven't already, because we literally just are doing live breaking news coverage as we speak. He's pleading to felonies. Okay, so this is a very big deal. I just have to point out, all right, because the thing about felonies is that there are going to be mandatory minimum sentences for some of these felonies. And that means that he is probably going to do prison time. Again, this is a huge, huge deal. Wow. All right. So this is the first felony guilty plea, by the way, in the prosecutions related to Donald Trump, the first felony guilty plea. Everything prior to this time has been a misdemeanor. And so really critical to remember that the implications of this are also extremely significant for the optics, for the court of public opinion, right? Ken Chesebro having been one of the people who was sort of leading the charge for January 6th. This is going to be really interesting to see how it's covered on Fox. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out in terms of the mainstream news coverage. But a felony plea, I mean, wow, this is a real turning point in this. I'll just say it, you guys. This is a sign that like nobody's getting out of this at this point. And I want people to really like grasp that with these 2 particular guilty pleas, and the testimony that they're going to be able to provide, because I got to remind everybody, one of the arguments that was made earlier in this case was that Ken Chesebro and Sidney Powell were working separate parts of this conspiracy. They actually tried to have their trials severed because they claimed that they had never met, that they were working on different arms. I mean, they didn't put it in these terms, but they were working on different arms of the RICO conspiracy. So each of them is going to be able to testify to different evidence that implicates Trump and Rudy Giuliani and others who were really at the top of this and watching everything move around. So this is like a huge deal, just a huge, huge, huge deal. Again, I want to remind everyone as well that we're going to have to wait and see what takes place next in terms of these other co-conspirators. But I'm just going to tell you all right now that the likelihood of Trump getting off in this instance right now has gone from like a very not very high number to virtually 0 at this point. Because when you've got people who are going to testify against you, who were in the room having conversations with you, where you were informed that you knew that you had lost, and you were being told that the legal strategy that you were applying was potentially a violation of law, to be able to then continue doing it is like kind of as guilty as you get. All right. So this is a really, really, really big deal. Like kind of, I can't overstate what a big deal it is. All right. While we're watching this all roll in, it is a big day. Today is a really, really, really big day. And I want to remind everybody as well that, we still have briefing going on in Judge Chutkan's courtroom. There was a huge brief that was filed last night by Jack Smith's team in opposition to Trump's claim that he's entitled to immunity for everything because he used to be president, which is not the way that it works. That brief was filed last night. It's a very substantial brief on the issue of immunity, like more than 50 pages, very much moving in the direction of, making new law. And that particular issue may end up on appeal to the Supreme Court at some point. So the substantial nature of the brief is really significant. But I want people to be aware that that's happening as well. And in Judge Cannon's courtroom, Walt Nauta's lawyer admitted yesterday that he has conflicts of interest that are unremedied, that Walt Nauta cannot waive. Walt Nauta's lawyer has stated that he represents two of the other people who are going to be witnesses. He can't be relied upon to effectively cross-examine them. And so now it's a question of whether or not Walt Nauta's lawyer is going to be kicked. So I just have to say, like, wow. I mean, I am just like really, really blown away by like the developments that have happened, like literally while we've been on the air. I also just want to mention, because somebody's asking me for this in the comments, so I'm just going to give it to you. Here's our merch link. If you like this broadcast and this broadcast served your interests and you want to kind of like share your support for it, I've just dropped the link to our merchandise shop in the comments. You can go buy yourself a t-shirt or a pillow or a button or a sticker or a magnet or a tote bag, and you will support the work that we do here in real time. And also the commentary that we're doing here live and on the fly. So what a hell of a moment. All right. I just want to check in here on really quick on the reporting that's going on about this while we're live on the air. Yeah, he's flipped. He's completely flipped. And the condition on his plea that he has to proffer, I think, is actually one of the most significant things that we're going to see here. So yeah, he's pleading guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit filing false documents with 5 years of probation, a $5,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, an apology letter, truthful testimony, and he has to provide documents and evidence to the state. This is a really serious plea. And, the other thing that I'll just point out here is that even though there's no jail time attached to this, apparently from the first guilty plea, I don't know if there are going to be more, because sometimes there's more than one. Again, I got to remind you, Sidney Powell pled guilty to 6 counts. So we'll see whether or not there are other counts coming to pass. But for those who are concerned about the issue of not doing jail time, one of the things that comes into play here for people who are cooperating witnesses is that the amount of cooperation that the amount of jail time that they do or don't do is usually, as I said on the breaking news broadcast about Sidney Powell, directly proportional to the evidence that they can provide and how that all is going to go. I'm just going to mention here right now that we are doing live commentary on the plea right here on the plea, on Chesebro's plea right now. So other people can join us if they want to. Okay. Thank you all for your patience while I do this. So I think that the other thing that's going to be really interesting to watch here as this all shakes out is whether or not we have immediate pleas coming on Monday. So one of the things that I would like people to just like consider here is that there are a lot of people with a lot more to lose who are, so there's conspiracy pleas happening right now as well. Yeah, Sidney has 6 years of probation. So this is the other thing that people should just be aware of. Well, there can be mandatory jail time for other felonies. This is only the first count, Judy. So I just want to make this clear as well, that there is a possibility that there's a subsequent guilty plea count coming that carries jail time. So we'll have to wait and see how this goes. Ordinarily, there are recommended sentences when somebody pleads out. And so there may be room here, even though the sentencing guidelines ordinarily, some felonies do have mandatory minimums. Again, this is Georgia law. I'm not a Georgia lawyer, but many felonies have mandatory minimums attached to them. However, there's always an opportunity, or in most situations, there's an opportunity for a judge to deviate from the sentencing guidelines in the event of positive or negative factors, right? Like being a first-time offender ordinarily means you do less time, right? If you have committed multiple crimes and you're back in court for the 17th time, you may get a much higher sentence than what's required by the sentencing guidelines. So it really depends in real time as we're watching this on what he's pled guilty to and what it is that has been recommended in terms of a sentence. But this is a very, very big deal right now in the context of how this is all going down. Now, I want folks to also understand that as I was just saying, the remaining 16 defendants have a lot more to lose. And many of them are small players. This is the other thing that I want people to remember, is that while we've had Scott Hall plead guilty now, Sidney Powell, and now Ken Chesebro, there's a lot of much smaller players in this conspiracy. There's like Kanye West's publicist, right? There's other election officials who were involved in this Coffee County scheme that Sidney Powell has now pled guilty to. And one of the things that we may find happening here, 1 to 5 years jail time. 1 to 5 years jail time is the recommended sentence. That's crazy. All right. This is really wild. This is really, really wild. Okay. So one of the things that is also being done here in real time, as I mentioned, there is allocution happening right now in the courtroom. And that is where he is required to state and confirm that the evidence exists for his guilty plea, because you can't just randomly plead guilty, because courts are concerned about the guilty plea being fair and whether or not you've been bullied into it, whether or not you've been, forced into it against your will, which of course has happened. Like, we only have to look at the exonerated 5 for examples of this. One of the things that I want people to also understand is that the evidence that is being described right now, apparently by the prosecution, is going to allow him to say that the evidence exists for his guilty plea. Apparently, Trump and Giuliani are being called out on the floor of the courtroom while this is all going down. Yes, he has requested first offender status, which means he may be entitled to a lesser sentence. But if the recommended sentence is 1 to 5 years, dude's going to do jail time. This is a very big deal. This is a very big deal. And I also just have to say, for those of you who have been here from the very beginning, like all the way back when this broadcast started, first in written form in 2016 and then live on the air in 2017 on Facebook, we've been talking about, that eventually the hammers were going to drop, and, that we thought they would drop earlier, much earlier than this. But I have to say that this is really significant. Now, for those of you who are asking questions right now about the federal court cases that are happening, I will repeat what I said about Sidney Powell's plea, because this is going to apply to Ken Chesebro as well. Once you've cooperated with a prosecution and you have testified under oath, that testimony is arguably something that could be used to impeach you, or that you could be called to the stand about in a future proceeding in another jurisdiction. All right. So here, just as it was the case with Sidney Powell, I would expect Ken Chesebro to be willing to cooperate at this point with Jack Smith in his prosecution of Donald Trump. And I also want people to just, be aware that, there is a looming threat of additional prosecutions if he doesn't, right? Just as is the case with Sidney Powell. Jack Smith's investigations are ongoing. We know that grand jury is continuing to meet. He did only indict Donald Trump in an attempt to what is speculated to be a streamlined effort to get Trump to trial in advance of the November 2024 election. But I just want everyone to be very clear that we're in a position right now where the extreme likelihood, I would say it's almost 100% chance, is that Sidney Powell and Ken Chesebro will also be cooperating with Jack Smith. So this is very, very bad news for Donald Trump today. Very, very, very bad news. I want folks to just also take a breath here and realize something very significant about this. This is going to be the first time that someone in Trump's inner circle is going to go to prison for the events related to January 6th. And, one of the things that we've seen that has been discussed a lot here is that people who invaded the Capitol building and engaged in the riot and engaged in destruction in an attempt to overthrow the election at the instruction of Donald Trump and his people, thousands of those people at this point have been prosecuted and gone to prison, but none of the higher ups have. So we also have this big turning point right now where at long last, someone in Trump's inner circle, in exchange for a deal, is going to do prison time for their criminal conduct. Again, it's huge. It's huge. I kind of can't even state how big this is. Moral turpitude. So somebody's asking about moral turpitude. Crimes of moral turpitude are crimes that involve your moral character, fundamentally, is the way that we talk about it. And one of the things that means is that where fundamentally, if you're a lawyer, if you're a licensed attorney and you engage in crimes of moral turpitude, you lose your bar license. You tend to lose your bar license anyway if you've pled guilty to any kind of a crime. But crimes of moral turpitude in particular are crimes that, generally speaking, are where your ethics and your morality are called into question. And that is very much the way that this is going to play out. I mean, I'm not surprised that the term moral turpitude has come up there. Yeah, it does. This is a funny question. For those of you who are new, there's been a running joke on this broadcast for the last 7 years about like, Mom, are we there yet? And we did have an "Are we there yet" moment when the Georgia indictments dropped, where I was like, yeah, we've arrived. Okay. But there's been a running joke about me being the mom driving the car and everybody else going like, are we there yet? Like, we're there with regard to Ken Chesebro, at least today, very much. And so one of the things that oops, there goes my mouse. Here comes the merch link again for those of you who are asking for it. One of the things that this means is that we're also in a situation here now where we're going to be arriving shortly, I think, on other defendants, right? I would just say, I think that there's going to be people just like racing right now to plead. Yes, this is unpacking the car, Kelly. This is the unpacking of the car. Very well done. So, the other thing I'm just going to mention here in this regard is that this means that Ken Chesebro is likely to do prison time in Fulton County. And I just want to mention to everyone, because you all know that I'm a prison abolitionist fundamentally. Those of you who have been here for a long time have heard me talk about this and the work of Marian Kaba and the ways in which prisons are no solution to any of the things that cause people to commit crimes, that there are bigger issues at stake that we really need to address: systemic racism, white supremacy, rampant misogyny, capitalism, and, poverty and homelessness, and, also like fascism. These are all major issues that would stop the cycle of crime to prison pipelines that we see that impact so many people, who lack the privilege that Ken Chesebro has. And so one of the things I want to point out here is that Fulton County's jail is notoriously awful, like notoriously bad. Now, I want to point out one thing here, which is that if, for instance, Ken Chesebro also takes a plea in federal court, there will likely be some form of a request, and there may even be one in this plea about where he can serve his prison sentence. This is a regular thing that is done in the context of sentencing. There are requests made all the time for people to do their time like closer to where their family lives, to make visitation easier, to serve time in a particular prison facility that may be a little bit easier to handle for a variety of reasons. There may be arguments to be made that he's older or that he's sick, or, we don't know how this is going to go. All right. But for the time being, at least it sounds like he's going to do prison in Fulton County. He's going to do time in Fulton County. So this is wild, just really, really wild. And I think that we're going to have a lot of things to watch as this all plays out in terms of how McAfee sentences him. I'm also just going to remind everybody one thing: that sentencing is usually stayed until after the conditions of the plea are met. So the likelihood here is that even with the guilty plea, he will not be sentenced until after he testifies against the other defendants. And so it's huge. I mean, I just don't even know. I feel like I've said that a million times already, but this is an extremely big deal. There's no way to kind of overstate how big a deal this is in the context of the future and what it's going to mean for Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and everybody else in the inner circle. Okay, if you haven't yet liked this broadcast, I think you should do it. You can like this broadcast, and you should also subscribe, because one of the things that's been really fun here this week is that like literally every time we've been on the air, there's been breaking news, whether it's been like a vote on Speaker of the House or Sidney Powell's plea agreement or everything that's going on with regard to, in this instance, Ken Chesebro's plea. So very, very, very big deal here today. I'm really grateful to all of you for being here. I am curious to see how this all plays out. And, I'm going to remind everyone as well that this is not just another domino falling. This is kind of like a boulder dropping, just to be really honest about it. And I think that we're going to have to see how this goes over the next couple of days. I would not be surprised one bit to see Donald Trump violate every gag order that he's under right now in relation to this. And we'll see where it goes. Reminder, if you like what you're seeing here, in addition to liking and subscribing here for free on YouTube, you can also head on over to patreon.com/resistance live and become a paid subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Subscriptions go all the way up to $100, and there's lots of perks that come with those. The big thing that you get, though, is access to the question feed 2 hours before every broadcast. So if you have any questions about what's going on politically, legally, from a news analysis standpoint, inside our current crazy moment of life here in the United States and around the world, you can get in over there to ask questions in advance of every broadcast. And your subscriptions also help to support this work financially, and my team behind the scenes who work so hard to handle, your tech questions, to set us up for every broadcast, to make sure that like everything is running smoothly so that we can be here, and do this good work and get the word out, and also motivate all of you to be fantastic activists and change agents and everything else. I'm super stoked actually about this news today. It's just such a very, very, very big deal. All right, my friends. If there is an additional need to go live today, I will do that. But I think we have a good reason to celebrate heading into the weekend. I'm going to remind everybody to please, take care of yourselves this weekend as well, because this has been an extremely difficult week on so many levels. And I didn't even get to talk about Biden's speech last night. I will just say one thing really quick before I let you all go. I thought it was extremely presidential. I thought it struck all the right notes. I think the importance of the statement that Biden said about hate not being welcome here was more important than it probably has ever been. And I think it was a really strong reminder of the fact that we need to jettison hate from our national discourse as well as from all of the international efforts that are underway. And it's really critical that we work. I mean, he didn't say it in these terms, but, I see all of this through the lens of systems of oppression. And to have a president of the United States out there saying, particularly to, the family of a Muslim boy who was murdered this week, to both Israelis and Gazans and everyone else, right? That everyone is welcome here, I think was a really, really critical point. So I loved it. Fox News even loved it. Yes, Rosemary. Britt Hume said he thought it was one of the best speeches of Biden's presidency. So yeah, that's good stuff also. And, again, many thanks to all of you for being here. Many thanks to all of our longtime viewers and to all of our new folks. If you're new here, welcome. You can go back and watch yesterday's broadcast for a little explanation of who I am and why I'm here and why we've been doing this for so many years now. And if I don't catch you on an emergency broadcast later on today or over the weekend, I will see you all here back on Monday, live 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, like we are 5 days a week. For our Patreon subscribers, I will catch you all at Progressive Coffee Hour at 8:30 a.m. Sunday morning Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, because we're going to have a lot to talk about. And I wish you all a wonderful and relaxing weekend, because wow, what a ride, my friends. What a ride. All right, we'll see who drops next. Thanks so much, everyone, and I'll catch you here soon. Take care. And please don't forget to subscribe. Bye.